I would like to call Rotarian Gorin to introduce them, please. Over to you, Gorin.
Thank you, President. Dear Rotarian, good evening, everyone. Today, it is my honor to be able to arrange these two young speakers to all of you. They are actually coming from an organization named MORAA, founded by these two young girls. A little background about them: they are both JB girls, studies here, just like living here in Johor Bahru, like the rest of us. So approximately about 2 years ago, they traveled to the States, to US, to did their studies. Cheryl actually is a chemical engineering. Am I right, Cheryl? Yeah. So Cheryl did chemical engineering, and Chanelle did something very special called political science. And both of them are very fortunate enough to be enrolled by New York University, which they would be traveling to the state again to further their study in September. Before they leave, I mean, they came home to Malaysia before the lockdown got happened in Malaysia and MCO, and of course the outbreak in US. They decided to take up their valuable time to form up this organization called MORAA, which is a short form of the Movement of Reimaging Adolescence and Adulthood. And what they do is really catches my attentions before I even knew them personally, because they go and interview a lot of people, young teenagers, to ask them to open up, to speak about whatever challenges they're facing. Like recently, if you guys remember, there was these students in middle secondary school. There was being, threatened by the teachers, saying that if you guys wanted to rape the adult, don't rape the below 18 years old. The young girl who was exposing this news was even interviewed by them, and it was uploaded to the social media for the better good of our country. So I think they really done a good job. So without further ado, I will pass the floor to both of them. I give to you, Rotarian, Cheryl and Chanelle.
Thank you, Garin. Thank you, everybody.
I will now share my screen to the PowerPoint before I start the presentation. Okay, this is good.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Clear to everyone?
You can speak a little bit louder would be better.
Hello?
Okay. Like move your...
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes,
okay.
We can. Yeah.
Loud and clear?
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. So good evening, everyone. I'm Chanelle Chong.
And I'm Cheryl Leong.
And we are extremely delighted to be your speaker today. So a brief introduction of ourselves. MORAA, the Movement of Reimagining Adolescence and Adulthood, is currently in the process of registration as an NGO. We seek to identify taboo topics in Malaysia, such as mental health, sexual education, single parenting, and gender issues. So MORAA believes that acknowledgement is the first key to positive change. We acknowledge the flaws in our current community, which is in desperate need of compassion, empowerment, knowledge, and inclusivity. Our role is to guide our team of youth who share the same goal as we do to produce insightful contents, link up with external organizations like Rotary Club, and constantly think of innovative ways to make a change in our community. Now, some of the events worth mentioning include our talk at TEDx USM on acknowledging mental health in Asian households and our talk on depression in Sunway University. Now, we hope to create a comfortable environment when approaching social issues that aren't talked about enough in Malaysia. So during MCO, we tried our best to be active and even shared several podcasts, including one with Ain Husniza on sexual harassment in Malaysian schools. It is not often that we see young kids like Cheryl and I to have a say in our society. I doubted myself at first, but I figured that I had nothing to lose anyway. And I realized that the world listens regardless of our age. So our talk today is one that we've never really touched on previously. Humanity in the Malaysian educational system. We will go through some of the experiences that we've had in the United States And we hope that at the end of this talk, we are able to convince more Malaysians to understand the meaning of humanity and what it really means to be literate.
Hello, a very good evening to everyone present today. Okay, let me be honest. If I'm reading off my script, I would tell you this is intimidating. But after a little warm-up session right before this started, I don't feel intimidated at all. If anything, I feel really honored and I'm really happy to be able to be here today. And I think this is gonna be fun. So let me get straight into it. Let's talk about the purpose of education. When I was little, I remember being taught in school that the importance of a good education, good grades, is to get a good job in the future. However, as I grew to develop a mindset of my own, I started thinking, so what's good? How do we define good? And how do we reach for good? So I dug deep. At this stage of my life, which to many of you might seem like just the beginning of one's life, I realized that the purpose of education should be evolving around literacy. To be educated should mean to be literate. So this ties in with the humanity in us, because literacy is based upon humanity. The elephant in the room. Humanity in the Malaysian education system. We all know there exists multiple flaws in our education system. The lack of personal development, the avoidance of sensitive topics such as political and racial issues, and most importantly, the ultimate purpose of education itself, the ultimate purpose of us going through primary school, secondary school, and pursuing a tertiary education. However, merely knowing the flaws is not equivalent to knowing them, and it never will. So I strive to connect the dots among the shortcomings in our education, which I came to the clear realization is simply humanity. Humanity provides the basis for self-exploration and true understanding, or is the core foundation for education. Without humanity, words will only be letters, not voices. At least 15 years of proper education for us to show the world how well Malaysians can read, write, and speak. But do we truly? The traditional concept of Malaysian education silences us. The moment we sit down for the first writing exams in our life, and I remember this vividly and clearly, we were instructed to steer clear of anything remotely related to relationships, religion, politics, and race. We were taught to write, but not for the sake of writing out what we feel, what we think, or just the things we want to say. A very common essay topic. Write about how technology has affected our lives. But make sure to not include any arguments along the lines of politics or race. They don't tell us why. They just tell us, don't do it. Students are supposed to excel in giving arguments with the fundamental premise that it does not point the argument itself as a topic, which is considered controversial in the eyes of our society. So, does that also convey that the arguments students are supposed to make are not meant to accurately reflect the current state of a given situation? There's always a formula to follow, a guide that will lead us to the appropriate definition of success, at least to the majority of our society. 1 + 1 will always equal 2. 7 A's in UPSR will guarantee you into the best secondary school in your area. That's it, no questions asked. Moreover, we are then brought up to believe that it is the way our life should be, so we could just seamlessly fit into the environment we were nurtured in and continue the vicious cycle. We are brainwashed into thinking we are supposed to stay irrelevant, to quietly accept everything just happening around us, even though we're living in it. The education system is constructed by humans to raise younger ones, i.e. us, with infinite potential. With humanity engraved into our education system, we will revisit our education system as a whole. I know it sounds complex, but it might just be the most comprehensible answer to build generations of Malaysians with creative minds, outspoken voices, and unstoppable ambitions. When we look at the education system, we always think that there are bigger, more pressing problems to solve. But perhaps we should take a peek at the root, at the purpose. It is always helpful when talking about literacy to remind oneself that writing is only one of the media true language is and can be employed. I quoted this from J. Robinson. You guys might have heard of him. He is a philosopher and an actor. To be literate means to be capable of expressing thought, ideas, and opinions in a democracy. This ties in with humanity. We are humans. Humanity is the basis of us. With humanity off the table, how does an existing education system thrive in nurturing expressive humans who have the ability to contribute to a better world? Meaningful conversations happen because of literacy. I am standing here today, or in this case, sitting here today, because of literacy. When we express our thoughts in a constructive conversation and inspect the point of view of other scholars, that's literacy. The purpose of education should be to build that literacy in our students, and this will only happen with humanity. There exists an inseparable bond between literacy and humanity. We can only achieve literacy by first obtaining humanity. In order to develop thoughts, ideas, and opinions in a democracy, there has to be just a teensy bit of individualism. Formulas make robots, not humans. Humanity fosters us to think critically, to implement what we experience into our arguments, to be capable of tying together what we learn from textbooks to what we apply in real life. There is a connection, and we need to see it. As we revisit the root of education, we need to inspect the connection between the world we desire to build and the functionality of the current state in our education system. Outspoken politicians with innovative propaganda are not cultivated by following textbook solutions. And why do we expect them to be? The chances of a student going through the self-realization that their voices matter, that my voice matters, even in this democracy, are not that high when they are taught their entire lives to be irrelevant. This is why we consider it a miracle when someone actually has something to say. When someone dares to point their argument at a subject the general public turns a blind eye at. The point is, why does it have to be a self-realization? As Malaysians, we take so much pride in teaching our students to be trilingual. Yes, that does sound very, very impressive. Whenever I tell my friends in the United States I am fluent in 3 languages, they always give me a look of awe. But I think to myself, what does proficiency in 3 languages stand for when we don't use either of them as our voice? I will pass it on to Chanelle.
Thank you. We're not saying that we should westernize our education system. What we're saying is that there has to be a balance that we can try to strike. Now, the current education system implies that students have to learn things the hard way. And what I mean by that is that it does not prepare you to fall. And it definitely does not teach you how to stand back up again. We were trained in a fantasy without a single hint of reality. Years of education can easily be summarized into one single examination, SPM, and nothing else really. So either the education thinks that students would magically learn issues and topics like politics, sexuality, race, or it really wants students to learn it the hard way. So as Cheryl mentioned earlier, we cannot expect students to become outspoken politicians when we restrict them from talking about anything along the lines of politics, religion, or race. Young girls and boys will not know how and when to protect themselves if we constantly refrain from teaching them how. Now, the world is definitely a learning ground, but perhaps with humanity integrated into proper education, we could save them twists and turns. We could teach students to understand themselves and the approaches we can take to conquer the reality that we live in. We can educate students on how mental health is as important as our physical health. Teach our students to say out how they really feel, what they really think under any circumstances. And tell our students that racism, sadly, still exists even in 2021, even in Malaysia. And the only way to stop it is to first acknowledge it. Now, students in Malaysia are raised again in a textbook fantasy. Now, that textbook tells us that we are united as a nation, that memorizing everything in the worksheet and thus acing an exam will lead us to success, that we will be safe as long as we don't walk alone in dark alleys. And the saddest thing about that is that we all blindly believe it. So when looked at in a certain depth, our education system and how we treat students as robots might seem bizarre to others. Yet, it is a norm to us. It's too difficult to change what has been rooted down for generations as an excuse, willingly paying the price of generations' suffering due to the lack of knowledge in humanity. Or should I say, the bravery to speak out. Scholars are criticized for leaving their homeland in search for broader opportunity and honestly, maybe just a place for their voices to be heard. Now, Malaysia could offer them that, but the root, which is humanity, has to be reevaluated. Teach our students to be literate, not just to read and write, but to project their opinions into the world, to preach for what they believe in. Now, there are multiple articles that took a peek at why we are currently standing at our position academically, why scholars tend to leave Malaysia and pursue their career or studies overseas, the aspects we are lacking as an education system as a whole, the barriers stopping us from growing, and why we are more ethnically segregated instead of united through education. At the end of the day, we want to improve education in Malaysia with countless efforts to explore potential approaches by looking at the existing efforts, including perceiving education as a business, taking a closer analysis on teacher qualities, and the general flow of education in Malaysia. The common interest of all the research we've prepared is to dig out the cause of why we are still in this dilemma, but mostly without an end game, not satisfied with the education we have now, but not knowing specifically how we visualize it at the same time. Now, here's an answer. Humanity. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is our references. Thank you so much for having us as the speaker today.